Good morning. May you be blessed by God on this Good Friday. We call it Good Friday because it was a good day for the salvation of humanity, but not such a good day for Jesus. Sunday morning we'll say Happy Easter, and we are overjoyed that Sunday morning. Tonight I will be doing a Good Friday meditation of sorts from my house about 7 o'clock. You're welcome to join me for that. This morning we look at 1 Samuel 27 through 29. And David has appeased Saul again here now after he spared his life. And Saul promises that, David will be safe. But yet as we begin chapter 27, we find out that David doesn't feel safe. He doesn't trust Saul. He says in his heart, I shall now perish one day by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than to escape. So David takes his men and they go to the land of the Philistines. And there's a little bit of humor in that to me because, David has been battling against the Philistines. Goliath was the champion of the Philistines that, several years previous David had, killed him and he had waged successful battles against the Philistines. But yet here David flees to the land of the Philistines. And he approaches this king of Gath, and he got there, and then Saul finds out that David has gone there, and Saul says, "Okay, I guess I can leave him alone. He shouldn't be a threat to me for now." And David and his men, they had found this, they had been given this place to live, and then here I think maybe this is where they get the idea that David was like Robin Hood, because he would go and he would not just raid a vicinity, but he would go and he would virtually slaughter every living person there, and he would confiscate all of the livestock and all of the goods, and that was the way he was living, making his living. And he attacked several different areas, different settlements, and they mentioned some of them, and again, just some of this just seems is just totally barbaric to me, to live that way and to go in and raid that way, and this king would see that David and his men had plenty, and where did you go raiding today? Well, I went against this group of the Israelites. So David was bold-faced lying to this guy because he wasn't attacking the Israelites. He was going and attacking other communities, probably not Philistines, but he wasn't raiding the Israelites anyway. And but part of David's deal was, he didn't leave any witnesses behind to go and to tell the king of the Philistines what was really going on. And that's when we begin chapter 28. It says the king of the Philistines decides again now to go to battle against Israel. It's just continually battling over land and over whatever, it's just, they're kind of like a lot of people today. You're never happy with enough with what they've got. There's the greed and stuff is there, and we're always looking for more. But the king decided to go to battle against Israel, and he had made David his bodyguard for life. We see that in verse 2 of this chapter, that as King Achish said to David, "Very well, I will make you my bodyguard for life." And then now we jump from the Philistines, having gathered their men, to Saul, the king of Israel, who has heard of this attack upcoming, and he has gathered his forces. And Saul now seeks the word of the Lord to see if the Lord will be with him in battle. And, and the Philistines are assembled, and Saul gathers all of Israel. And in verse 5, when Saul saw this army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled. But when he inquired of the Lord didn't answer him. It says, not by dreams or by Urim or by prophets. Urim, I don't know how to say that word, but Urim and Thummim, Thummim, were probably two of the breastplate pieces of the ephod, of the clothing that the priests would wear, or kind of breastplates, or maybe even kind of armor. But they were, also probably instruments that were used for divination, finding out things, by divination, and by revelation that way. But so God wasn't answering in his dreams by these units of divination or by the prophets. No, God wasn't speaking to Saul. So Saul seeks out a medium, wants to have a seance. The only problem is he's kicked all of the mediums out of the land and says we can't have them because they're not from God. But he goes to seek one out, and there aren't very many of them. So he secretly goes after he finds one, and he disguises himself, and he goes and he asks this medium, to do a seance. And, well, who do you want me to bring up? Samuel. And you are Saul. She knows who he is. I mean, so maybe she's got some powers. But anyway, and she brings Samuel up. And so Samuel and Saul have a conversation here in this chapter. And Samuel, said, what are you doing disturbing me, bringing me up here, And, it's just, I don't put a lot of stock in mediums and seances and stuff. I've never been to one, never, taken part in one. But here, at this point in time, God saw fit to let Samuel go to have this conversation. So Samuel came back from the grave and had this conversation with Saul. And Samuel isn't happy about it, but Saul says, I'm in great distress, for the Philistines are warring against me, and God has turned away from me. Think about it, God has turned away from me. Who turned away from God first? Saul wasn't worshiping God. He wasn't doing what God had said. And he had fallen out of favor with God, and it said that God had left him. And it's hard for us to hear those words today. I look at God as a God who is always willing and watching and waiting for us to come back, much like the father in the story of the prodigal son. It's more about the father's love than anything else. But God wasn't relenting with Saul, just as he didn't relent with the Pharaoh and others in the Old Testament either. And, so he says, well, God has left me. He's not answering me by prophets or by dreams or anything else. So I summoned you to find out what I should do. He's down to his last resort. And Samuel gives him words that he doesn't want to hear. He says, because you didn't obey the voice of the Lord, verse 18 is where I am, and did not carry out his fierce wrath, the Lord has done these things. Moreover, the Lord will give Israel, along with you, into the hands of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me. That's not a good thing to hear. From a person that is dead and has been buried, that tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. That means that they're going to be dead. So Saul has had his worst fears confirmed. And immediately it says he falls full length on the ground and he lays there prostrate, and he hasn't eaten, and he's just, famished with hunger. And this woman tries to get him to eat, and he says no. But then the men with him and others finally do get him to eat. And so she is, and this woman, that is medium, has got a fatted calf ready, and she slaughters it and takes flour. And she's got all the provisions, and she feeds Saul and his men. And that night the Philistines are gathering their forces. And as they're gathering them, as we get into the chapter 29 for today, a quick look here. The other commanders of the Philistine army come to the king and say, we don't want David and his group of men, with us. Even if they're going to be way in the rear, even if they're going to be at the back of the battleground, we don't want him in our group, because what if he and his men decide to fight with the Israelites against us? Then they're going to be coming at us from the back, and and we don't trust this David at all. And so David is fortunate, I think, in many ways here, because this king of the Philistines then sends David and his men back to where they were. He says, we don't want you in the battle. The others, the other commanders don't trust you, even though the king has made David his bodyguard. So David and his men go back out and return to the land of the Philistines. And as we end chapter 29 and reading for today, David returned, but the Philistines went up to Jezreel to do battle. And so we conclude for today. Tonight again, you're welcome to join me at 7 o'clock for a Good Friday meditation. May you know God's blessings today as always.